In the last 24 hours, I have spoken to, not on purpose, gone on my way for it, but have had the opportunity to hear from two or three people who lived here for many years. Today, someone who was celebrating their 44th year in Israel. Yesterday, someone was here for 38 years. And this feeling of absolute, utter yeush, just hopelessness, permeated the discussion with what's going on right now. Someone messaged me about a half an hour ago saying that it says in the Shulchan Aruch, you really should be staying away from any kind of legal action, any Beit Din action during the 9 days. It's not a good time. And yet the Knesset goes ahead and passes this law, Dafka now, and look at the Milchemet Achim, the civil war. I put it in quotes right now. I hope that's all it will be. And then you have people like Barak, and you have people like this, and the streets are on fire, almost literally in some cases. You're like, what are we supposed to do with this? What are we supposed to do with all that? And I've been thinking a lot about it today, actually. First of all, we have to understand that while it is one of the things I was mentioning in the class on Sunday, for those of you who come to the Tefillah class, you know that we talked about the idea of Hashem kind of inserting himself when necessary, removing a person's free choice to make sure that his plan is carried out. I cannot accept that every single person who was out demonstrating violently in an anarchistic manner and blocking roads and all that, everyone was acting in their own free will. I think that Hashem has some very, very big plan for us. I think we're seeing the Sinat Chinam that played out just before the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash, playing out before our very eyes, similar Sinat Chinam, because the case is, at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the second one, this situation to today was very similar, meaning that there were the issues, the three big issues that caused the first Beit HaMikdash to be destroyed, which was Gilui Arayot, immorality, idolatry, and murder. They were fine with. They weren't doing those things. As a matter of fact, they were big tzaddikim. They were learning a lot of Torah and everything else. And among the most famous reasons that the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, we know the Sinat Chinam. We have now, I just said this today, I spoke today at a group, a senior group, that I claim, I think, I don't have anything to base it on, that since after Matan Torah, after the giving of the Torah, I think there's more learning of Torah going on in the world than anywhere else, right, in any time in Jewish history. And yet we have this terrible, terrible division right now in society. And because there are certain tzaddikim in the world who feel it's their responsibility as heads of state to weigh in on internal matters in Israel and to make sure we know that we hear what they have to say, it makes things even worse because they think they have to say what they want. I think there's one municipality in one African community that has yet to weigh in on Israel's business. How is it that a country of 10 million people out of 8 billion plus people on earth commands such attention in the news and in the newspaper and online from countries all over the world? There's only one answer. Mika Amcha Yisrael. We are unique. We are the Am HaNivchar, the chosen people. To quote Tevye, sometimes we wish he would have chosen somebody else for certain things. But we have to understand, and I'm saying this more for myself than anybody else, because I think we need to take a little bit of a breather here, that with all the craziness that's going on right now, and all the people, like I said before, some of you had come on, the people I've talked the last couple of days who especially been here for many, many years, lifted the first intifada, the second intifada, this war, that war, and they feel a sense of hopelessness right now. And maybe, can only hope and pray that it's getting to the point where Hashem will, quote, have no choice but to step in and send us the Yeshua, send us the Moshiach, send us someone, the right person, who will save Am Yisrael and on the world stage, and will be a time of De'at Hashem. Everyone will know God and will be in a different era. You can only hope and pray.
It shouldn't be lost on anybody, though, but 18 years ago, Gush Katif, you saw the same scenes playing out,
yes,
but on the others, but against
correct,
us, instead
right,
of them
correct,
prying people one by one from the from their clutches and their grips. And interesting,
Yeah.
18 years later.
Exactly. So there's an expression which comes from Yosef HaTzadik when he was taken out of prison. He's brought before Paro, and he says, "Et chata'ai ani maskir hayom." I want to mention my sin today, meaning he's going to say that I was in jail and everything else. And I say, "Et chata'ai ani maskir hayom," that if I was here in July 18 years ago, just before I came, I knew kind of what was going on. I kind of felt connected. I sort of understood what was going on until I came to the country and I saw literally in the streets what was happening. And before that, I hadn't taken sides. I didn't know what I believed, what I didn't believe, what I was holding, where I was. And then when I went back to Chicago wearing an orange wristband, and I came to Shul that Shabbat and I spoke and I held up my wrist and I showed it and I talked about it. And I said I was embarrassed. I was ashamed of myself that I had yet to take a stand earlier, and it was tearing the country apart then. We see what happened as a result. We got a terror state next to us. I'm sure that you were all shocked by that because who could have seen that coming? I just hope that we're going to have a very different outcome from this. Bezrat Hashem, Bikarov. Okay, end of pontification. Let's begin the class. We are going to start tonight with chapter 19. Let me go straight to these slides and keep that on the screen. We're going to start with chapter 19. And what I'd like to do is we're going to read before we read the first paragraph or two, I want to just kind of give an intro for just a minute. I'm going to say like this. I know you can read, but some of you can't necessarily see your screen well or have it on the phone, so I'll read it to you. Of the 4 questions we raised in the previous chapter, which was chapter 18, concerning hidden love, remember the Ahava Mesuteret was the topic and is going to be the topic for many chapters, up through and including chapter 25. And he reintroduced it last chapter. There were 2 questions that were answered in the previous chapter. Those were, what is the root of this love? Remember, we said where it came from, and how did we come to inherit it? So we talked about that it's something that's direct connection to Hashem. Every Jew has it, no matter what their level is. We talked about the fact that it's a Yerusha, an inheritance from Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, from Sarah, Rivka, Rachav, Leah, our Avot Nimahot. It comes to us as in our DNA. And that Ahava Mesuteret, again, I remind you, if you don't remember, is that connection that anyone has to Hashem, every Jew, through their level of Chokhmah, which is the highest level of Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. We talked about that last week, or 2 weeks ago. And that's the Ahava that comes out, the love, on a natural way, even when a person has no intention or any forethought. For example, we talked about the idea of someone who was Jewish but not observant at all, far away from Torah, that when it came to having to give up their life, to not want to do something they shouldn't, that literally gun or sword to the head, is the Shema Yisrael. I'm not going to go against God's will when it came to the idea of Kiddush Hashem. That's the Ahava Mesuteret. But there are 2 questions that we left unanswered. We're going to start with chapter 19. We'll get into them. We won't necessarily answer them tonight. What is the nature of the love? Meaning, what does this love strive for? That's going to be the beginning of this chapter. What does it want to do? We're going to talk in a metaphysical way or a physical way about something that's really spiritual. And that is this Ahava Mesuteret, this hidden love, this natural love, this love in our DNA. What does it want? Okay. If I ask you, what does your stomach want? So at certain times of day, it says, feed me, right? It wants to be fed. Some are very machmir on that. Okay. Others less so. But the point being that we have to feed ourselves. God gave us this drive, gave us certain drives that without them, we would cease to exist. One of which is hunger. What is the drive, so to speak? What is the striving of this nature of this love? And also, how is the fear of Hashem incorporated into it? How do we work in the idea of Yirat Hashem? We saw a brief passage in the prior chapter that I can understand Ahava Mesuteret, that Ahavat Hashem can be bequeathed. It can be given as a morasha, as an inheritance. How do you give over? How do you bequeath? How does one inherit Yirat Hashem? Even though we kind of touched on the last chapter, there needs to be more spoken about that. So without any further ado, let's take a look at the beginning of the next chapter. The two things that are in red, we're going to look at a couple of slides from Rav Steinsaltz, and that yellow highlight, Ayin Shkufiyah al Hanoseh, is my reminder to mention a shkufiyah as a slide. I love the word, but I'm not going to get into it. Never mind, because I'm going to start wandering into Ivrit and words of that nature. Speaking of that, okay, I have to say something. For those of you who are interested, the Academy for Lashon Ivrit, Academia Lashon Ivrit, which is has an online presence, unbelievable. There's this woman, maybe I just met her. I just found her a few weeks ago online by accident. She does these very short little things on Instagram, and you can see them on Facebook about the language. Like, what is she has a series called Mahazeh Shel Hazeh. Like, you have, like, for example, on your shoelace in English, the little plastic piece that keeps the shoelace together. I actually know in English called an aglet, Aglet. Why do I know that? Don't ask. I have no idea. But in Hebrew, she goes through this. What are these things called? Then she takes a song that's popular and she tears it apart, like the grammar's terrible. Here's what and she does it in a very humorous way. She's very, very charismatic. So if you have any interest in seeing some of those videos, remind me, and I'll just send you a link to at least one of them. You can always watch the others. Okay, to say that. Let's take a look at the beginning of the chapter. To further clarify the issue of Ahava Mesuteret, we have to first start out by clarifying what it says when the pasuk says, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. The candle of God is a human's neshama. What does that exactly mean? First of all, we know that on the one hand, that means that when we light a yahrzeit candle, for example, or when someone, God forbid, is sitting Shiva and they light a candle, we know because of this pasuk, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. There's a connection between the Ner, candle, and a person's neshama. What exactly? Perush, it means, She Yisrael HaKurim Adam, the Jewish people that are referred to as Adam, Nishmatan hi lamashal ke'or hanev. The neshama of a person in a parable, you can't say parabolic, that's a different meaning, but in a parable fashion, is like the light of a candle. Notice what he says. He doesn't say that the neshama is like a candle. He says it's like the light, the fire that's on the candle. And I'm going to show you a little graphic that I made. Get a little bold with my work here. And what does it do? What is it like? What does a candle do? When I've taught this before, this idea, not just from Tanya, it's in other places. I want you just to picture. I take a candle, I light. I was going to do it, but I don't want to make a mess on my table. You light a candle and you turn it sideways. What happens to the flame? It doesn't go down. It goes up. No matter which way you turn the candle, the flame always wants to go up. And he says, its nature is to always want to head upwards, betivo, in its natural state. Why? Because the light of that fire, chafetz beteva, in its natural desire is lipared me'aptila, to separate itself from the wick, and to cling to its original source, which is up high. And I'll explain this next line in a minute. Bisoda esh, which is the element of fire, haklali, shetachat galgala yareach, kmo shekatuv be'etz chaim. That the source of fire, then we're going to kind of like to suspend our belief for a minute, as we'll see why, that the fire, every fire, when it is not catching onto something, when it's just by itself, always, no matter which way you're holding it, always wants to go up because it wants to reconnect and not just to connect, lidabek, to cling to its shoresh, to its source. What's its source? Its root, which in this case he refers to as just below the level of the moon, is the source for all the fire on earth. I'm going to come back to that. What does that even mean? But right now, what he's saying, let's continue reading. Even though when that would actually happen, if that flame would get subsumed into its original source in the fire below the moon, it would extinguish, it would become extinguished. It wouldn't give any light, neither down here nor up in its place of its source. Yitbatel oro, its light would be we call a bitul, Bitul means complete being subsumed. B'mitziut v'shorasho, be completely subsumed into the shoresh, into its root, i.e. the fire source in heaven. Nevertheless, it still wants that flame. The flame wants to be subsumed into the source of that flame in heaven, even though it's going to be completely batel, completely subsumed, and not even have its purpose on earth to give fire or to give light. What's the connection? Before we give, and we listen to Rav Steinsaltz on these two things, that are in red, let's just take a moment to understand what he's saying here. Wait, hold on. Visually. Got a better visual. Here. Okay. Visually. Years and years ago, this is in parentheses, you don't have to worry, I'm not going to be giving any additional information for the book right now. Years and years ago, I was asked, as Rabbi Schultz, to come to one of the local day schools in Chicago and give an introductory overview or class to the students that were about to start Gemara for the first time, Kita Hey, or whatever it was. And I don't know how this popped into my head, but as I've said many times, Hashem just sends us stuff and you got to run with it. I asked one of the teachers if they had a book of matches. And I took the match and I held it up. I said, anyone want to touch the match? So the kid, a bunch of hands go up. I had a kid come over and touch it. I said, okay, go sit down. Thank you very much. Go ahead. I lit the match. I said, okay, who wants to come up and touch the match now? Ooh, not going to go anywhere near that. I'm going to get burned. I said, why? What's the difference? A match is a match is a match. Well, there's a fire on it. Right. There's a fire on it. So I explained to them that match, before you lit it, before you struck the match, was potential. All that was is potential. When you take action, you do something, you really work at something, it can take off. And then it has a different level, it's in a different state. And now from potential, it's come into action. Okay, if you remember that, that's fine. You don't remember it, that's fine. But what's going on? Here's my Havdalah can. Poor little thing. Okay, so what happens, and for those of you who put it out by putting it into the wine or grape juice or whatever you use, so what happens, it's after you finish the Havdalah, right? So you go like this, the flame, unless you have a very strange Havdalah candle, doesn't start shooting down, it's still going up. So you have to play around with it to get it into the wine. Why? Because as he says here, the teva of fire is to want to head up. Why up? Because as he said, the source is in the heavens. We're going to just leave that unexplained for a few minutes. And therefore, not only does it want to head up to its source in its nature, and I'm keep repeating the word teva purposely because it's going to come up for a reason. Not only does it want to do that, but it even knows, I'm putting this in quotes right now, that if it does get to its source, the flame is going to be gone, completely subsumed in a bigger flame, will not be flaming down here, won't be giving fire or heat or anything, and it's happy with that. That's its nature. So too, says the Admor HaZaken, the Alter Rebbe, that's the desire of the neshama. The neshama, we talked about in the very beginning of the book, doesn't want to be here. Whether you learn Mesilat Yesharim, Derech Hashem, most books that have to do with some kind of spiritual growth, and of course, Tanya, you know that the neshama has no desire to be in this world. It would much rather be where it came from, which is Ki'ilu mitachat kiseh kavod, from under the Hashem's throne of glory. And if you had a choice between living in a cesspool or living in a palace, I think you'd probably choose the palace. And that's pretty much what the choice is, in a sense, in quotes, for the neshama. So the neshama wants to go back up. It wants to be subsumed, to be batel, or as you say in the Chassidut, it is the concept of bitul. A bitul is the complete subjugation and being subsumed into the source. It wants to be completely, even though that neshama will no longer be in a person, even though that neshama will not be here on this earth, but it's going to be completely back at its source. That's what the neshama wants. Just like the light, the flame on the candle, so too the neshama. That's the general idea of what he's saying here. If there was not more than that, I would just move on, but we have more to say. That's why we have Rosh Steinsaltz. Let's take a look at a couple slides. First, okay, I think that now I should be nominated for an Oscar for my graphics. Thank you very much. I will the close the dinner in my honor for this one graphic is going to be right after Tisha B'Av. Okay, this is I'm pointing to the screen like you could see. Okay, it's great. Okay, let's try it like this. Yeah. What he's going to talk about is the neshama here and the goof. We're going to see what it means by that. The flame. We're going to see about the neshama, the oil. We didn't talk about that yet, right? We didn't talk about the actual oil. I want you to keep this in mind. I'm going to come back to this. Let's take a look at what Rav Steinsaltz says. I'm going to start right here where it says dimui. Dimui, there are two types in English. We have two words. We have what's called a simile and we have a metaphor. A simile is when you use the word like or as. For example, it was light as a feather. That's called a simile. A metaphor is on the wings of angels. It doesn't use the word light, like or as. A dimui is the Hebrew word for metaphor. Dimui is a simile. Okay, a metaphora is a metaphor. Okay, dimui zeh yesh lo mashma'uyot behekefim shonim. This is a very broad simile that he's mentioning here between the neshama and the light of a candle or the fire. The mashma'ut abesisit, that the basic meaning, kemuvav b'mekomot acherim, is mentioned in other places. Nimshalat nishmat adam lelehava shel haner. The neshama of a person is compared to the flame of a candle. Guf ha'adam, or nefesh ha'bahamit, the person's body, or their nefesh ha'bahamit, their animalistic soul, liftila shel haner, is compared to the wick of the candle. The Torah and mitzvot, what connects the flame and the wick, what puts them together, he says, is the Torah and the mitzvot that make that connection between the fire and the wick. As long as there is oil, the fire burns. It doesn't allow the ptila, or the flame, the wick, to be extinguished. Take a look for a second. You have the oil. And forget right now about the shaman. You have the oil. What allows that flame to burn? It's not the wick. The wick is just a conduit, right? It connects the oil to the fire. As long as there's oil in the cup, the flame will burn the wick, will burn and continue. It doesn't destroy the wick. Just think Hanukkah. If you use an oil Chanukiah, if this runs out, there's no more this. So he says like this: the wick, the flame, the shama, the body. What's the energy? What's the delek? What's the gasoline, so to speak, that allows that to burn? Torah mitzvot. That's the basic understanding. Guf v'nefesh b'mahutam hem shnei nigudim. We know that the person's body and their neshama are two opposites, two things that are completely opposite. In order to readjust them, to connect them to one thing, you have to put something into motion, into action. And if not, that the connection between the neshama and the guf would just fall apart. Hanefesh poneh, the chibun echad, the neshama turns towards one direction, meaning heavenward. It wants to be in the shamayim. The haguf, the chibun acher, and the body to this world. So they're pulling at each other in a sense. What keeps them together? In order to maintain the connection between the guf and the neshama, that the light of Hashem, i.e. the neshama, should continuously burn. It needs a constant source of energy that will sustain it. In order for the neshama to burn, so to speak, in quotes, in order for the person to live, it's not enough just to have a neshama. It has to be burning something using this mashal, this parable. As soon as the wick is missing oil, it stops burning or enabling the burning, and it will be destroyed. You could take a wick. If I take a wick out of a candle and I light it on fire, it's going to just burn up. Whenever a person is missing this additional or this connection, he can no longer sustain the connection between the body and the neshama, and he dies. Now, we did say that the nature of the flame is to try to go back to its source, try to go up to the heavens. This simile, this idea of the fire wanting to return to somewhere just below the moon is based on ancient knowledge or ancient science. Lefiha, according to it, munachim arba'a yesodot shel olameinu. There are four, it comes up, we've talked about this also in the beginning of the book, that there are four elements in the world: fire, wind, water, and earth. Zel gabe zeh. But not only do they exist, but one on a higher level on the other. Yesoda afar lemata mikula. The element of earth, dirt, is the lowest. Me'alav yesoda mayim, and above that is water. Ume'alav yesoda ruach, and above that is wind. Kulam yesoda esh. And the highest element, in a physical sense, sort of, is fire. Mikomoshi yesoda esh hu efo biktzeh elyon shel ulamin. Therefore, the source of fire is therefore at the edge, the upper edge of our world, where mitachad legalgal yareach, below the moon, shu tachton ben agalgalim mekifin oto, which is the lowest of the celestial bodies of all the bodies that exist in the universe. Now, before I go on, now obviously we cannot accept with modern science that such a thing is accurate. He will digress here, and I'm not going to get into it where I've kind of bracketed it into the idea of how, even though it's not what he's going to explain in a moment, we'll see how we can still understand this. But I would just draw your attention to one thing. He notes here in the parentheses. If you look in the Rambam, Hilchot Yesodei Torah, Perek Gimel and Dalet, if you have the chance, it is a fascinating lesson in astronomy. The Rambam's knowledge, first that he knew that there were 9 planets. He didn't get the memo that Pluto was downgraded. I think it's been upgraded again. The 9 planets and the celestial bodies. And then how he goes into, not in that section, but later, the movement of the sun, the moon, the sun, the stages where the moon relative to the earth is. It is mind-boggling. It is unbelievable. If when you read it, you actually understand it, please call me and explain it. The general rule is, and we know this for a fact, that all of the Yesodot want to go to return to their source. We have an expression in English. What is it about water? Water seeks its level, right? If I pour water, it's going to keep going down and down and down until it hits water, until it gets to where it is. Remember, Koach HaMeshicha, gravity, if I take dirt, earth, whereas it wants to be with the earth. It doesn't just stay up here. Wind is not drawn down. Where does it go? It's up, drawn towards the other winds, as it were. And as he said, though, the fire wants to go to, right now it's going to say below the moon. And the desire of fire is to go further up towards the source where the fire is, jumping down to here. The desire, it's more than that the fire strives for, the little fire, to be subsumed into the bigger, to be swallowed up by the bigger fire, in its source. Now, let's put aside for a minute the idea that the sun, that the fire source is below the moon. Put that aside, ancient knowledge or science. Let's talk a little more practical. But the idea that if I have a very big fire going, Okay, next time you're by a medura, by a campfire, and you take a stick with a flame, put some fire on it. You don't put fire, you light a fire. You light a fire on the edge of the stick and then get it closer and closer and closer to the fire. What happens? When you take a candle, or my example, a stick with fire on it, closer and closer to a fire, it is a scientific fact. You can try it. You take it, and as you get it closer to the bigger fire, you see it's getting drawn into that fire. And as it gets closer, that flame goes out. What happened to the flame? It became part of the bigger flame. It looks like the desire of the fire is to be subsumed by the bigger fire, to be connected to that bigger flame. What does it mean? Because it's important to understand this simile to understand how it connects to our whole discussion about the neshama. He said, okay, in the ancient times, they believe that this fire that's on this here, here's this, I got this here. And he's going to walk in and say, why are you making Havdalah? By the way, just as an aside, because this Shaila actually came to me last week. A person for any reason forgot or couldn't make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat. You have until Tuesday morning to make Havdalah, but only you do it on the kos, just on the drink, not on the fire, not the besamim. And you can use the besamim, but you don't use the fire anymore. It's only motzash. I've had only one occasion in my life to have to do that for somebody, but thank God other than that. Anyways, so so the first step is I have a fire. So the way the Alter Rebbe is describing it is that fire is always going up, even if I do this. Why? Because it always wants to go up to the fire source below the moon, even though it knows it's going to be gone, even though it knows it's going to be completely subsumed. It's going to be a zero. It's not going to be, this right now is his chashivut. If I like this, this is a burning flame right now. If it gets subsumed in the giant flame in the sky, so to speak, then it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. But he says now, Rav Stein says, put it into just normal modern day terms. If I take this match, I like the match, not the big bonfire, as I slowly bring the match towards it, you're going to see it get sucked in, so to speak. That's the nature of fire. Whoops. Now we're going to go. Okay, go back up now to the text. And notice, I'm going to reread to you here. Oh, no, I did this part already. I read this whole thing to you. Okay. Let me read this part now. The next part, in your book depends on paragraph. It's not a paragraph in my book. This is how I just divided it with the screenshot. Kach nishmat adam. So too is the same idea when it comes to a person's neshama. V'chein bechinot ruach v'nefesh chefza v'chishka b'tiv'a. So too when it comes to our neshama, the neshama of the Adam, the Jew, also the issue of all the levels of our neshama. There's something we've talked about briefly called naran, neshama, ruach. Well, I'm not going to get into now, but just trust me. The different levels of neshama, its desire, its willingness, its want, in its nature, is lipared, to separate from us, v'latzeit min haguf, to go out of our body, v'lidabek b'shorasha, and to connect to its source, umikora, and its beginning, its source, its root and its source. With where is that? Hashem chayei achayim baruch hu. To reconnect with Hashem baruch hu. If you remember the very beginning of the book, we talked about the idea that when we say that we are a chelek elokami ma'al, mamash, that we are literally, our neshama is a part of Hashem in the literal sense. We talk about Hashem breathe the breath of life, and that was the neshama going in. That neshama, as it were, kiviyachol, comes from Hashem. And therefore it says, just like that the flame wants to reconnect with its source, so too our neshama wants to reconnect with its source. In spite of the fact that what? Hagam shetihiyeh ayin ve'efes, even though it's going to be a zero, it's going to be a nothing. v'titvadel sham b'metziut legamre, and it's going to be completely subsumed into the reality of where it's going to. V'lo yishaer mimena me'uma mimahuta u'me'atzmuta harishon, and nothing. There'll be no trace left of it as that neshama, because it's going to be in this olam neshamot and subsumed to Hashem. Afal pichein, less zeritzonah dechevtza b'tiv'ah. That's its desire in its nature, the nature of the neshama. B'teva zeh, I'm right here if you lost the place, if you look at the screen, b'teva zeh, right there, who's Shem hamushal l'chol davar she'eno b'bechinat tam v'dat. He says that the word teva, or nature, is a word that's borrowed. What does that mean? Well, we can't explain something with logic, with science, with whatever it might be, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more next time, is we call it nature. It's nature. Now, we've already talked about the idea of nature before, of teva, but he's going to go in a different direction in this chapter. We'll see. V'gam kan, and so too here. Hakavana sheretzon v'chefetz zeh b'nafsho, the desire and intention of the nefesh, the neshama, eino b'bechinat ta'am v'dat, v'sechel, musag umuvan. It's not a logical thing that the neshama should want to go back to its source. Why? Because it's not going to exist as a neshama. It's not. It's going to be part of a part of Hashem again, so to speak, part of the olam neshamot. So there's no logic to that. It's only something that's natural. Ella, where's it going to be? Lamala mehadaat v'sechel musag v'amuvan. It's not something natural, but it's above seichel. It's above common sense. And it is the muvan v'hi bechinat chokhmah shabanefesh shabaor ein sof baruch hu. He comes back now to the topic of chokhmah. It's that the idea we talked about in the last chapter. How do we connect to Hashem? Where is that ahava mesuteret? It's in the chokhmah, the highest level of the chokhmah bina da'at triumvirate. What is he telling us here? What's in the red? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense when this flame on this Kabbalah candle wants to go back to its source, but if it's going to be gone. It doesn't make any sense for the neshama to want to return to its source if it's not going to exist as the neshama anymore. And he says the same thing is true in both. In both, it's their nature. In both, it's the thing that they both want. It is their teva. Again, he puts that almost in quotes. He also says that it is not logical. If I told you, I would give you a choice. You can be who you are, or I'm going to put you into China and just drop you into about 2 billion people, and you'll be who you are. And just be another person there. No big shot, no anything. I mean, why would you want to? Because the whole thing is about the anis, the I. It's about me. We're going to talk about this next time. That why does it go against our nature? Because part of who we are as the nefesh habehamit is our ego, is our ani. It's about me. It's me. So I'm basically saying that my neshama doesn't want to exist. It also means what? Our neshama doesn't have an ego. It's very important. Our neshama elokit has no ego. Because if it had an ego, it wouldn't want to leave the body. It would want to stay down here. Hey, that's Joe Schmo's neshama over there. I want to continue Bezrat Hashem this next week. I'm a couple minutes early. Continue next week. I'll look at Rav Steinsaltz on a couple of slides on these topics. But I think it's hopefully very clear tonight. Now, we've had some rough patches of stuff that wasn't maybe as clear, a little bit more Kabbalistic. But I think right now, what he said, and I mentioned to you last time also, the mashal or the parable, in the beginning of chapter 19 is really beautiful, and I think crystal clear. The flame wanting to go up, Shema wanting to go up, it's their nature. It makes no sense, especially since they're going to be subsumed and not really exist as is. How does that impact on Ahava Mesuteret? We shall see Bezrat Hashem, hopefully next week. I wish you all a great evening. I wish you all to be dancing Bezrat Hashem in Yerushalayim on Wednesday night. You better be. Country needs it desperately, as I said at the beginning. And if not, chas v'shalom, have an easy fast. Be well. Have a good evening.